Hello, and welcome to another episode of the B2B Leadership Podcast. My name is Nils Vinje, and today I'm going to answer the question, how do you give effective feedback? And this is one of my favorite leadership topics because there's something so simple and intuitive about giving feedback, but there's some significant challenges that exist in the leadership world that I see every day when I help leaders overcome those challenges to give effective feedback to help other people grow. Now, the role that feedback plays in the lives of your employees, the people you work with, the people you work for, is enormous. Feedback is a key part of our personal and professional level of growth that we can expect. The more feedback we get, the better we will be, the more corrections we can make, the more courses we can change. If we never get feedback in an effective way, or at worst, it's detrimental, it's going to steer us off course. It's going to take us in the wrong direction. That's the absolute opposite of what we really want to do, because it is one of the most powerful leadership tools that you have access to. It's also one of the easiest to put in place. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do that in this episode. But the question often comes up is, well, how important is giving feedback? I mean, lots of people tell me all the time, yeah, I give feedback. But I would bet that if I went and talked to every single person that reported directly to them and asked them specifically about the level and amount of feedback they were given, it would always be less than what they wanted. That is just based on my experience as a leadership coach for over 10 years and the founder of the B2B Leaders Academy, as a place where I talk with leaders every single week about the importance of feedback and how to give effective feedback. So even if you think you're giving a lot of feedback today, I want you to take a pause and just listen to this episode with an open mind and think about the possible ways you could change and shift your perspective and the way you give feedback based on what I'm going to share with you. Harvard did a research study a little while ago, and they asked a few thousand people about the things they like to do and receive the most and the things they like to do and have happened the least. So the results were staggering, and it paints a very clear picture of exactly what I was just sharing in that sentiment before. The clear picture it painted was they found that the number one thing that people wanted the most was to receive negative feedback. Now, this might be contrary to what you think, but if we look at it from the angle of growth and development, and we say that the vast majority of people want to receive feedback in order to grow and make changes and become a more productive person, then it seems reasonable. So the number one thing people want the most is feedback, and specifically negative feedback. They called that out in contrast to positive feedback, because the positive feedback is good, but I think they felt like they were probably going to grow much more from the negative feedback, or the negative is also termed as corrective, negative or corrective feedback, than they would from the positive. Now, here was the most interesting part. The other side of the coin was, what do you like to do the least? And the number one thing that the leaders said they like to do the least was give negative or corrective feedback. So here you have the thing that people want the most. Everybody on your team today who reports to you, and even if you're not technically running a team today, the people who work with you, the number one thing they want the most is negative or corrective feedback to help them grow. However, the number one thing most leaders want to do the least is give negative or corrective feedback. And that's a real opportunity for those to take advantage of. And that's exactly what I'm going to walk you through today, is how to take advantage of that opportunity. Because if I sat down with anybody who reports directly to you, or perhaps works with you, or even who you work for, and I asked, what's the number one thing you want? There's a very high likelihood it would not be, more money or a promotion or whatnot. I guarantee it would be a very high likelihood people would say, I want more feedback. Because feedback leads to growth, growth leads to opportunities, opportunities leads to progression. Very simple linear equation there. So if we as leaders give more effective feedback consistently and make it valuable, then we have a greater chance of positively impacting the lives of the people that work for us, inspiring them to grow, and ultimately taking on greater and greater responsibilities and progressing in their career. And that's what we're all about from a leadership perspective. So there's a common misconception about giving feedback. And I've seen this in my work as a leadership coach, and I've seen this in all kinds of different situations that come up. A lot of times, feedback can be seen as an authority figure telling somebody who is less authoritative what they did wrong. And this is 100% wrong. This is not the approach that you want to take. Feedback is not about demonstrating how smart you are. Feedback is about being objective and being clear and laying out exactly what happened and then inviting the other person into the conversation. And you're going to hear exactly how I coach my clients on how to do this and give you a little behind the scenes peek of what we do inside the B2B Leaders Academy. And I'll give you my 3-step feedback made simple system. And I'll even tell you how you can find out more and go deeper. So that misconception about giving feedback, it's an authority figure piece, right? And I have to demonstrate how smart I am, or how many answers I have, or how, I've been through this before, and therefore I should be the one to tell you that you did this wrong. That's not going to work out very well. In the grand scheme of giving feedback, if you're approaching it from any kind of perspective that has anything to do with the demonstration of how smart you are, or how many just answers you have, you're doing it wrong. And I'm going to tell you exactly how to do it right. And to highlight this point, I want to share a story about a previous boss of mine. Many years ago, I worked for a director, and this director would fly off the handle and get livid anytime anything with a customer went wrong. Now, I was working with customers. I was responsible for their engagement and work with our software. And we were a software solution. So anybody who's in the world of software, you know that software does not always work correctly. So there were always going to be challenges. But what happened was that every time something went wrong, she would fly off the handle. And it was really disruptive to myself and to our entire team. Nobody ever knew what side was going to come out when something went wrong. And we lived in fear a lot of the time of the repercussions of what was going to come next. Nobody wanted to show up on those days when we knew something was going to go down. And this had an impact beyond just our immediate work. It made me nervous and hesitant outside of work. Right? I took this home with me, and I was dealing with feelings of feeling like I was talked down to. And she was literally just giving me feedback every time this happened, but the manner in which she did it was so ineffective that I would have been far better off had I never heard any of the feedback than if I received her feedback. So she had this perception in her mind about the fact that when she had to give feedback, it was a demonstration of expertise. And I needed to be, and my team needed to be taught how to do things the right way. So as you can imagine, this was a really difficult time. And eventually, this all came to a head. And we had a very heart-to-heart conversation between her and myself and the rest of the team. What we found out, and she was vulnerable for a bit and shared with us feedback after we expressed our side of the story. What she shared was that the reason she reacted the way she did when things went wrong was because not actually because she wanted to prove how smart she was, even though that's what it felt like. The reason was because she didn't want to look bad in front of the other executives. So again, the source of the central part of this feedback was based on the fact that she didn't want to look bad. So therefore, anything downstream of that just didn't really matter. How it affected me, how it affected my team, how it affected anybody aside from her, that was the crux of what she was solving for. How do I make sure that I look good in front of the other executives at the expense of everybody else? Now, at the time, she didn't obviously think about it as at the expense of everyone else. She wasn't a mean person. She wasn't a bad person. She had just never been trained on how to give effective feedback. And I can't really fault her for it, but I also can't let it go and just say that, well, that's just the way it is and she should never have to change because she needs feedback. And we, the team, gave her that feedback that day. and started to make progress towards a more productive relationship together. But that's just one example of how much is really on the line when it comes to giving effective feedback. If your feedback is centered on you in any way, shape, or form, whether it's a belief about your expertise or not looking bad in front of other people, like my boss previously, for example, then you're going to run the risk of adversely impacting the people you're giving feedback to, and it will not be effective, guaranteed, 100%. It is going to affect them in a negative way, both in the work that they do, in their level of engagement with your team and with your company, and outside of work. Again, the things we do as leaders have a tremendous impact on the people that we lead, far greater than you probably even imagine. And oftentimes we don't know about this until it's too late, and that's a big reason why I decided this episode was critical to do now. So what I'm going to do is share my 3-step Feedback Made Simple system so that you know exactly how to give the most effective feedback possible and give your team exactly the thing that they want the most. I'll go through step by step, make sure you understand all the pieces. If you'd like to get a more detailed version of this, along with some examples and things to do, then go to B2B, the letter B, the number 2, letter B, leadersacademy.com/feedback, and you can sign up for the 100% free 5-minute feedback makeover, where I'll walk through this in great detail. But I'm going to cover it here at a high level, and then you can get more details if you go to b2bleadersacademy.com/feedback. So step number 1 of the Feedback Made Simple system is, here's what I observed. So this is the actual action of giving feedback, and the preparation before you give feedback is more important than anything. So this is a map for how to detail out exactly what you're going to say, exactly the feedback you're going to give, and make sure that it's spot on and you can give this with complete confidence. Okay, the first part of the phrase starts off with, here's what I observed. Now, a couple things that are really important here. Number 1, this is no place for generalizations. So if you find yourself saying you always or you never, those words and those phrases do not apply. If that's all the level of detail you have, get rid of the feedback and don't even bother giving it, because it will not work. We can't take action on things that are vague. And most times, the things I see when people are giving feedback are vague. And remember, what happens in vagueness stays in vagueness. So if you're giving feedback around vague things like you always are late with your work, or your reports are just never at a strategic level, there's nothing anybody can do with that. It's impossible to take any action because it doesn't really mean anything. So step 1, here's what I observed, has to instead focus on irrefutable facts, things that are undeniable that happened, that you literally observed. So here's an example. What I observed was in the team meeting on Tuesday, you said, quote, and then you insert exactly what was actually said during the team meeting on Tuesday. So if there was a team meeting on Tuesday and the person said, quote unquote, that sentence, that's exactly what you put in here. There is no interpretation. There is no judgment. It is purely just a fact. And it's not right or wrong at this point either. It literally is just a fact. So the number 1 problem, aside from what we talked about earlier with the feedback centering on most people's desire to be at the center of it, is that it's vague. And so step 1 is designed to eliminate the vagueness. And if you sit down and write out, here's what I observed, and you write some bullets, and you cannot get to a specific irrefutable fact, you do not deserve the right to give feedback. Just don't do it. Find another way around. Okay, so step number 1, here's what I observed, and then you share the irrefutable facts, which are going to paint the picture of the rest of the conversation. Now, step number 2 is, here's the impact that had. Now, we have to be really specific in step number 2, just like we were in step number 1, but it's slightly different. Here in step 2, you're being specific about the impact that the irrefutable facts that you observed happened. And the reason why this is so important is that most people have no idea what the impact of their actions really are. They will go through and do what they think is best, but they are not taking into account the million different ways it could be perceived by every other person on your team and in your company and whatever. It's just too much, right? So every person is acting based on what they believe is the best course of action. So step 2 is where you get to share your interpretation of the impact of the irrefutable facts you shared in step number 1. So again, as you're going through this in the prep, when you're thinking, here's what I observed, here's this, well, what impact did that really have? And this is going to force you to say, was this a big impact? Was it a little impact? Was it a giant thing, or was it a minute little thing? Right? But you have to be really specific and clear about the impact that that had. Now, step number 3, we have one of 2 options, and I'm going to cover both. Well, option number 1 is for the corrective negative feedback, and option number 2 is for the positive feedback. So the exact same system here can be used for both situations. And that's the beauty of this. Steps 1 and 2 will always remain exactly the same. Step 3 is where we have a choice and we have a branch. Up to the top, we're going to talk about the negative or corrective feedback, or if we go the other way to the positive reinforcement, we're going to have that as a branch off the bottom. So if we're going to the negative corrective feedback in step 3, there is one simple, very powerful question we're going to ask. Here it is. Help me understand what's going on. Now, you might be saying, hold on a second, what, we're going to ask a question about the feedback that we're giving? Yes, 100%. So step 1, here's what I observed. These are the irrefutable facts. Step 2, here's the impact that had. You share your interpretation of the impact that their actions had. Now, step 3, help me understand what's going on. Why is it so important to ask a question at step number 3 if we're delivering negative or corrective feedback? How are we going to give them the corrective part of the feedback without delivering it? Well, the reason is that when you lay out step 1 and step 2, just as I've shared, what you're going to do is lay the foundation for the conversation. Then when you ask the question, help me understand what's going on, what you're doing is bringing the other person into the conversation because you're curious about what is going on with them, so that caused their actions, which ultimately resulted in the impact. Now, there's 2 sides to every story. And if you make an assumption about why somebody did the irrefutable fact that you observed, you're going to be wrong. So the simplest way around this is don't assume. Just take out any assumptions, focus on the facts, share the impact, and then ask, help me understand what's going on. And they will always have an answer. There's nobody, I've given this thousands of times using this formula. Everybody always has an answer because they were going through something in their day, in their week, in their life that caused them to act a certain way that led to the impact that now they're sharing that perspective with you, which I guarantee 100% you did not know before. So before you can go to any other place from setting expectations or anything else to change the behavior, you have to understand what drove the original behavior in the first place. So that's option 1 on the negative corrective feedback. You're going to ask the question in step number 3, help me understand what's going on. Invite them into the conversation, listen to their side of the story, and then maybe we'll decide a different course of action after that. Now, the other branch on step number 3 is to reinforce the specific behavior in the event that we want to reinforce, give positive feedback, right? And the specifics here, again, you're going to see the common themes throughout everything we do that has to be specific. This is one of my favorite myths to dispel from a leadership perspective is when you say good job, it really means nothing. When you say great work, it means absolutely nothing. In fact, it might even mean less than not saying anything at all. The reason is there's no specifics around what you're saying great job or what you're saying great work to. Even if you said, hey, I really appreciate your work on the project, great work. What? Great work on what? The beginning of the project plan, the fact that I spent extra time and hours above and beyond what was required. What are you saying great work to? And it's really difficult. So if you stop at the surface level and you share these platitudes and just generalizations, you will not be delivering effective feedback. Instead, let's use that same kind of emotion and what you really want to get across, but let's get specific. So here's an example. In the team meeting on Tuesday, you said X. The impact that had is Y. I really appreciate the initiative you took in kicking off this project and seeing it all the way through to conclusion. Now, that level of detail is far more specific and is going to be far better received than great job or you really ran the show, right? Business world is filled with generalizations and they're useless. They just don't work, especially when giving feedback. So the more specific you are here in step number 3, and as with all the steps, the more specific, the better. And that's why the preparation is so important to making sure that you deliver this consistently in a way that is going to actually help the other person. So as I mentioned before, the Feedback Made Simple system is designed to be reliable, repeatable, and easy to implement. When this is like learning any new skill. At the beginning, you're going to have to think about it. Okay, what's step 1? What's step 2? What's step 3? But the reality is, the more you do it, the more you will train your brain, and you will get to the point where you don't even think about the steps. All you do is simply give feedback in the Feedback Made Simple system steps without even thinking about it. And that's the absolute best place to be, because then you can be guaranteed to never make assumptions that are going to put you in an inappropriate place. And you can reinforce the positive behavior you're seeing, and people will grow 2 times, 10 times faster when you give this effective feedback. So the number one thing that you can do right now after listening to this episode is use the Feedback Made Simple system. And I'm going to give you a challenge. Give 2 pieces of feedback in the next 24 hours based on step 1, step 2, step 3. And if you'd like for me to walk through it in a little bit more detail and show some specific examples and get into things in a little bit more depth, well, join the 5-minute feedback makeover by going to b2bleadersacademy.com/feedback. And then send me an email, nils@b2bleadersacademy.com, and tell me the reaction of the people that you gave the feedback to, both the negative or corrective feedback and the positive feedback. When I shared this, introduced this to the members of the B2B Leaders Academy, they were blown away. They implemented it right away, and the feedback they got based on their feedback they gave was tremendous. One of my clients, one of the members, actually put it in place and wasn't 100% sure how to make it work. And then remembered that, we have both the negative corrective side, but we also have the positive side. And she decided on a Friday afternoon, because we had covered it the day before, on a Friday afternoon to send each one of her team members the step 1, step 2, step 3 to reinforce the specific behavior on the positive feedback side. And they went into the weekend absolutely on cloud 9, just flying and so thankful to hear the specifics of what this leader did and appreciated about them and their work that week. So the level of specificity you give is going to determine the effectiveness of your feedback. And the level of consistency you have in giving your feedback is going to be a key determinant in your effectiveness as a leader. So remember the Harvard study, where the number one thing people want is to receive negative or corrective feedback. But the number one thing that people don't want to do is to give negative or corrective feedback. And you can completely transform this. You can become an elite leader by changing the game and following this simple and reliable system to give feedback effectively, to help other people grow, and to make a dramatically positive impact on other people's lives. And that's the true joy of being a leader. If you're in a leadership seat and you did not have a sincere interest in the growth and development of your team, you're in the wrong position, and there's something better for you to do someplace else. Right? Because like my former boss, if you have any hint of that, where the center of the feedback and the reason why you're giving it is because of you, it's wrong. It's about the other person, and we have to invite them into a conversation. But in order to do that, we have to lay out very clearly, here's what I observed, here's the impact that had, and help me understand what's going on. All right, that's it for this episode. Remember, go to b2bleadersacademy.com/feedback to sign up for the 5-minute feedback makeover. Everything is 100% free. I'll walk you through it in great detail. I'm here and committed to help you get results as a leader, and this system will 100% guarantee get you results. I look forward to hearing your responses, and send me an email, nils@b2bleadersacademy.com, with the feedback that you got and how you felt giving feedback using this system as opposed to what you did in the past. Can't wait to hear about your success. Until next time, take care. Have a wonderful rest of your day.